Hello Ace, this is RetroTK2 and today we're looking at the history of the QWERTY keyboard. This is all part of a new sub-series Ace where I'll show you how to learn a new keyboard layout. But before we learn a new layout, it's usually a good idea to learn why the old one isn't as good. We'll look at the history of QWERTY and discuss all the possible reasons why it could be inefficient. Then we'll see some performance figures on the layout and see just what words are the most difficult to type with it. It's a fairly long episode here Ace, so without further ado, let's get started. Well, what are the origins of QWERTY? Ace, to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure the internet knows. Let's have a look at all the supposed origins. According to Wikipedia, the QWERTY design is based on a layout created for the Scholes and Glidden typewriter and sold to Remington in 1873, and remains in use on electronic keyboards due to inertia, the difficulty of learning a layout that differs from the currently entrenched standard. The QWERTY layout was devised and created in the early 1870s by Christopher Latham Scholes, a newspaper editor and printer. He made the machine with the assistance of his friends Carpalx Glidden and Samuel W. Soule. The construction of the typewriter had two flaws that made the product susceptible to jams. Firstly, characters were mounted on metal arms or type bars, which would clash and jam if neighbouring arms were pressed at the same time or in rapid succession. Secondly, its printing point was located beneath the paper cartridge, invisible to the operator as so-called upstroke design. Consequently, jams were especially serious because the typist could only discover the mishap by raising the cartridge to inspect what had been typed. The solution was to place commonly used letter pairs like TH or ST so that their type bars were not neighbouring, avoiding jams. So there you go Ace, slowing the typist down to ultimately speed them up. A sort of less speed, more haste philosophy. Super, but apparently this is a complete myth, or at least it's a supposed half-truth. According to an article on smithsonianmag.com, it turns out that there is a lot of myth and misinformation surrounding the development of QWERTY, but these various theories all seem to agree that the QWERTY layout was developed along with and inextricably linked to early typewriters. The popular theory states that Scholes had to redesign the keyboard in response to the mechanical failings of early typewriters. If a user quickly typed a succession of letters whose type bars were near each other, the delicate machinery would get jammed. This is describing the information on Wikipedia and goes on to mention the TH argument. But then counters the argument by saying this theory could easily be debunked for the simple reason that ER is the fourth most common letter pairing in the English language. A simple look down Ace will show you that E and R are side by side on the QWERTY keyboard. Unless, of course, you're viewing this on a mobile device. You know what Ace? It's spelt QWERTY. There you go. Anyway, the article continues and suggests an early prototype did separate the E and R and was called QWE_TY. The article then goes on to describe the history after the QWERTY design and explains how it became so popular. I'll not clutter this video with the history Ace, but I definitely advise you to have a read for it yourself. It's pretty interesting. The URL is in the description if you're interested. The article then begins talking about a new theory, that the QWERTY system emerged as a result of how the first typewriters were being used. Early adopters and beta testers included telegraph operators who needed to quickly transcribe messages. The typewriter keyboard evolved over several years as a direct result of input provided by these telegraph operators. In this scenario, the typist came before the keyboard. The article then quotes a Kyoto University research paper stating the speed of Morse receiver should be equal to the Morse sender, of course. If Scholes really arranged the keyboard to slow down the operator became unable to catch up the Morse sender. We don't believe that Scholes had such a nonsense intention during his development of typewriter. The article also states that Scholes himself wasn't convinced that QWERTY was the best system, and that he continued to invent improvements and alternatives to the typewriter for the rest of his life. Whew, wow, Ace. Well, that was a lot to get through, but it's important to explore the history to see why the old system is bad. First, if we go with the jamming theory, the keyboard was designed to slow the typist's movement down to greatly decrease jamming of the typewriter. Doing so would speed up typing overall since you're not having to stop every couple of minutes to unjam the machine. Using this theory, we now know that the QWERTY layout isn't the most efficient way to type since it was made less efficient to speed up efficiency. Bit of a paradox, yes, but hey. This is certainly reason enough for me to look for a better alternative on its own. But that second theory sheds a different light on the origin and supposedly blows this one out of the water. This idea that early adopters poured years of experience and usage into the QWERTY keyboard layout. They had plenty of opportunities to change and tweak the layout to how they liked it. So why wouldn't they create the most optimal way? Well, the Kyoto research paper the article references might be able to shed some light on that. It says the code represents Z as ... I gotta be honest with you, yes, my Morse code isn't great, so I apologise if I'm butchering this. Which is often confused with the diagram SE, more frequently used than Z. Thus, S ought to be placed nearby both Z and E on the keyboard for Morse receivers to type them quickly. These early adopters probably would try to get the most optimal way for typing out their messages. But that's the thing is, these guys aren't writing a novel or creating a spreadsheet. Hey, the messages they're receiving probably aren't even fully formed, since I would assume, perhaps wrongly, that you would want your messages short and very, very sweet. No fancy English here, is just simple and to the point. My argument here is that although they are the first typists, they are using the QWERTY layout for a very specific purpose. Another interesting point the Smithsonian Mag article brought up was that Scholes himself wasn't convinced that QWERTY was the best system. Does this give it more conviction, Ace? Would this convince you that the QWERTY keyboard layout isn't the most efficient layout to use? It's not exactly concrete, is it? A lot of uncertainty with the origins of the layout and the intentions behind some of the design decisions. Usually when given a situation like this, it's best to put the history to one side and test the darn thing. All the information I'll be using is coming from a section on the website mkwen.bcgsc.ca called Carpalx. The link is very much in the description, Ace. I want to go on record and say I have no standing with this website, nor am I being paid to promote it. Now that that's out of the way, this website is fantastic, Ace. Not only does it have a full breakdown of all the most popular keyboard layouts, it also has better alternatives and a download for the software they use to gather their data. Maybe it's just me, Ace, but I'm so impressed by this site. If you get a chance, I definitely recommend heading over to it and checking it out, if only for the QWERTY keyboard layout breakdown. Martin Kraswinski, I really hope I'm saying your name right, I thank you. According to the site, typing effort is modelled using 3 contributions. Base effort derived from finger travel distance, row, hand and finger penalties to limit use of weaker fingers or hands and distinguish hard to reach keys, stroke path effort, a complex figure of merit that rates the effort based on finger, row and hand alteration, e.g. ASD is much easier to type than SAD. This is captured by the stroke path effort. I'm not 100% sure whether these are the best metrics to use to determine whether or not a keyboard layout is efficient, but so much effort has gone into it that I just can't ignore this. Let's have a look at QWERTY under Carpalx tests. At the start of the page, it gives a brief history of the QWERTY keyboard layout and even describes the jamming origin theory. Martin, at least I assume he is the author of this, goes on to say QWERTY is not only counterproductive but arguably harmful to people who spend their days at a keyboard. This layout should be deprecated. Okay, let's see the typing effort. Well, you may be somewhat disappointed to learn that QWERTY has a 1 across the board, Ace. That's because QWERTY is the base type that Martin is using. It makes sense since it's the most popular keyboard layout. However, as you'll see, it's usually the most inefficient as well. Feel free to study the calculations for the model parameters, Ace. I'm not going to lie to you, I would probably prefer to watch paint dry and leave all this to the experts. But that's just me. The only real way to see how QWERTY compares to other layouts is to simply compare it with one of them. Here, Martin is comparing it to Dvorak, another popular keyboard layout patented in 1936 by Dr. August Dvorak. Looking at the diagram, and what a lovely diagram it is, we can see a ton of green across the board. It's St. Patrick's Day, Ace. Well, apart from the one red for finger effort, but I guess it was too drunk to care. Anyway, it's also worth noting that Martin draws attention to the fact that the sum of the row and finger effort is not equal to the total penalty. Apparently it's due to the non-linear nature of the penalty definition, but honestly it's beyond my current level of comprehension. Martin then goes on to talk about migrating from Qwerty to Dvorak, colemak, and the QWKR layouts. We'll be looking at them in the next video, yes, but feel free to check them out on this site. Let's have a look at the detailed statistic. Aye, because the stats that we were looking at before certainly lack detail, yes. Carpalx evaluates a keyboard for its finger, hand and row usage frequencies and runs. Qwerty has a high top row usage frequency, 51%, and only 34% use the home row. I'll talk about the home row in more detail in a later video, yes. Qwerty heavily favours the left hand with a hand asymmetry of left-right 0.15. The weaker pinky and ring fingers make up 32% of the keystrokes, making Qwerty inefficient at using the stronger index and middle fingers. Martin also gives a fairly decent set of words and their difficulty when typed with the Qwerty layout. I would personally assume that the hardest words to type should contain the least used letters of the English alphabet. Likewise, the easiest should contain the most used letters. According to Wikipedia, the most used letters in the English alphabet are E, T, A, O and I. And the least used letters are Z, Q, X, J and K. No real surprise that 4 of them are vowels, yes, but I must admit I'm a little surprised to see T in second place. All probably because of the word the. Yet again, we see more evidence that Qwerty isn't the most efficient layout, since I would expect to see all 5 of these keys in the home row. Instead, we have J and K taking up the index and middle finger of the right hand. My right hand is my strongest, yes, so this is a complete waste of my 2 best fingers. At the very least, Z and Q are accessed using the left pinky finger, which for most people is usually the weakest one. This is supported when we look at the hardest to type words in the Qwerty layout. A lot of words with 2 or 3 Z's in them, yes. But the easiest words are a lot less impressive. Not as many E's and A's as I'd like, and no T's to speak of. Instead, we have a lot of words containing J's and K's. Not good, yes. This has been a pretty good look at the effectiveness of the Qwerty keyboard layout. I hope by now you can see just how inefficient it is, yes. And that's it. Rate, comment and subscribe, yes. I hope you liked this history lesson. You can email me at retrotk2@gmail.com with your Qwerty woes. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you in the next video.